Shanghai never really slept. Even long after midnight, the city pulsed with energy, neon lights shimmering against the slick pavement, the hum of traffic weaving between luxury cars, and the whispers of business deals that never reached the surface. To outsiders, it was the city of dreams, opportunity, wealth, and unshakable beauty, but beneath the glamour lay a darker truth, a kingdom of shadows ruled by one man, Joan. His name was more than a name, it was a warning, uttered carefully in the underworld, sometimes with reverence, more often with fear. He was the man who built an empire on discipline and ruthlessness. The son of a dynasty that had collapsed under betrayal, who had clawed his way back to power with blood-stained hands. By 35, Joan had become Shanghai's most feared mafia boss. His word was law. His silence carried weight heavier than 100 threats. His presence, sharp and unyielding, made even the bravest men hesitate before speaking in his presence, and yet, despite his towering empire of money, loyalty, and blood, Joan lived in solitude. Inside his penthouse on the 38th floor, glass walls revealed a panoramic view of the city, his city, but Joan rarely looked at it. He sat alone at his oak desk, black suit jacket draped neatly over the back of his chair, shirt sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal the veins in his forearms. His fingers tapped lightly against a tumbler of untouched whiskey. But his sharp eyes were fixed on the papers before him, shipment routes, coded transactions, names of allies and enemies alike. The world believed Joan felt nothing. That he was carved from stone, incapable of fear, immune to love. And in many ways, that was true, until one ordinary night, fate placed him in the last place anyone expected, the smoky warmth of a jazz cafe. The cafe wasn't a place men like Joan usually went. It wasn't guarded, it wasn't controlled, and it wasn't exclusive. It was small, tucked into a quiet corner of the French concession, a place where locals and foreigners alike gathered for drinks and music. Joan had stepped inside not by choice, but by the persuasion of his oldest friend and advisor, Liang. You work too much, Liang had argued. One drink, one night. You're becoming a ghost in that penthouse of yours. Joan didn't answer. He rarely wasted words. But he allowed himself to be dragged along, if only to silence his friend. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and aged wood. A saxophone crooned softly on stage, accompanied by the gentle brush of drums. Low amber lights cast shadows across the tables, and conversations hummed just loud enough to blur into the music. Joan walked in and immediately commanded the air. Heads turned, though most dropped their gaze quickly. Even here, among ordinary people, his aura was undeniable, an untouchable boss cloaked in elegance and danger. He might have left within minutes, had he not seen her, Aaliyah Johnson. She sat near the stage, scribbling into a worn notebook as if the music itself poured onto her pages. Her skin glowed under the warm lights, smooth and rich, her natural curls falling gently around her face. She wasn't dressed to impress, just a simple blouse and jeans, but she radiated an effortless confidence that made her stand out more than any diamond ever could. And then she laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forced. Just a soft, genuine laugh at something the saxophonist had said between songs. But it reached Joan in a way that startled him. His chest tightened, his pulse quickened. He had stood in rooms filled with gold and power, but never had something so small, so human, disarmed him so completely. For the first time in years, Joan forgot to breathe. Aaliyah, oblivious at first, eventually felt the weight of a gaze. She looked up, her pen pausing mid-sentence. Across the cafe, her eyes met his, and the world seemed to still. Most people, when faced with Joan's sharp, penetrating stare, faltered. They looked away, shifted uncomfortably, swallowed the fear creeping up their throats. But Aaliyah didn't. She held his gaze, steady and unflinching, her lips curved in the faintest smile, teasing and curious, before she tilted her head and called across the quiet space, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. Do you always stare at strangers like that? The cafe hushed. Conversations faltered. People exchanged nervous glances. No one spoke to Joan that way, but Joan didn't react with anger. Instead, his head tilted slightly, a flicker of amusement sparking in his eyes. He rose from his seat, each movement precise and deliberate, and crossed the room with the calm stride of a man who owned it. He stopped at her table, only when the stranger, he said, his voice low, smooth as silk, looks unforgettable. The words should have felt like a line, practiced and empty. But something in his delivery, in the unyielding way his eyes locked onto hers, made Aaliyah believe he meant it. She raised an eyebrow, lips curving. That sounds rehearsed. Joan's lips twitched his version of a smile. No. It's the truth. Their exchange lasted only moments, but it was enough. Something electric lingered in the air between them, unseen but undeniable. Aaliyah looked back at her notebook, trying to hide the warmth in her cheeks, but she could still feel him. Watching. Studying, and for Joan. It was the beginning of something he couldn't explain. Something he had never allowed himself to feel, an obsession. When he left the cafe that night, the city seemed different. The neon lights didn't feel so harsh. The silence in his car wasn't as suffocating, yet his mind replayed her laugh. The curve of her smile. The steady, fearless way she had met his gaze when most men cowered. In the privacy of his penthouse, Joan poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. Instead, he pulled out his phone, typing one name into the search bar, Aaliyah Johnson, 26. Black American. English teacher at a private school in Shanghai. Single. Ordinary to the world, extraordinary to him. Joan leaned back, exhaling slowly. He didn't understand why. He didn't want to understand why. All he knew was this: for the first time in years, the untouchable boss wanted something. Someone, and in that want, a dangerous truth began to form. Aaliyah Johnson would become his secret, his weakness, and his greatest obsession. The rain came lightly the next evening, painting Shanghai in streaks of silver beneath the city's neon glow. Streets glistened like glass, umbrellas dotted the sidewalks, and the hum of traffic softened under the patter of water. Aaliyah Johnson loved nights like this. She walked briskly from the cafe, notebook tucked under her arm, curls damp from the mist. Shanghai was still new enough to feel like an adventure, every alley a secret, every lantern-lit street a painting. She'd been in the city for less than a year, teaching English at an international school, but she'd already fallen in love with its rhythm. The contradictions fascinated her: skyscrapers beside centuries-old temples, luxury stores next to tiny noodle stalls, silence tucked between chaos. Tonight had been like any other. Music, scribbles in her notebook, stolen moments of peace. Except for the stranger, the memory made her lips twitch in a small smile. His face had been impossible to ignore, sharp jawline. Eyes so dark they seemed to pull her in, presence so commanding that even the cafe's shadows bent toward him. Men like that weren't supposed to exist outside of novels. She'd teased him without thinking, her tongue quicker than her caution. And he had answered. Smooth. Dangerous. Almost too real. Aaliyah shook her head, laughing at herself. Get it together, girl. He was just a man. But deep inside, she knew he hadn't been just a man. Across the street, a black Mercedes slowed. Inside sat Joan Chen, his gaze fixed on the woman striding confidently through the rain. Liang, seated in the front, cleared his throat. You're following her, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Joan leaned back against the leather seat, expression unreadable. Observing. Boss, Liang pressed, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. You've never observed anyone like this. Joan's silence was answer enough. He wasn't the type to justify his actions, not even to Liang, the only man who had earned the right to question him. But even Joan couldn't explain why he was here. Why, instead of attending a meeting with arms dealers, he had chosen to trail a woman who should have meant nothing to him. Yet as he watched Aaliyah pause to buy roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, laughter escaping her lips when the old man miscounted her change, Joan felt that same unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Unfamiliar. Unwanted, and undeniable. The rain thickened. Aaliyah ducked under an awning, shaking droplets from her hair. She unwrapped the chestnuts, savoring the warmth against her palms. When she looked up, she nearly dropped them. He was there, across the street. Leaning against a sleek black car, umbrella tilted just enough to shield him from the rain. Watching her, the stranger from the cafe, for a moment, she froze. Most women might have felt fear. After all, men who followed you at night in Shanghai weren't usually the safe kind. But there was something different about him. Something steady, almost protective, in the way his eyes never left hers. She raised a brow, voice carrying over the rain. You again. What is this round two? A flicker of something amusement crossed his face. He straightened, crossing the street with deliberate steps, his umbrella held like a shield. When he stopped before her, the scent of rain and cedar clung to him, clean yet dangerous. You shouldn't walk alone at night, Joan said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. Aaliyah tilted her chin. I've been walking alone for years. Don't tell me you're here to lecture me, stranger. Not a lecture, he replied. A warning. Her laugh rang out, bold and unafraid. What are you, some kind of superhero? Lurking in the rain, keeping helpless women safe. His lips curved the faintest shadow of a smile. Do you look helpless to me? The air between them thickened. For a moment, Aaliyah forgot the rain, the street, the city around them. She saw only him, the intensity in his gaze, the weight of unspoken truths. A shiver ran through her, though she wasn't sure if it came from the cold or from him. Then why follow me? She asked softly. Joan's eyes lingered on her face, on the raindrops glistening against her skin. His answer was low, almost a whisper. Not following. Protecting. From men who don't understand the word mine. The word mine hung heavy in the air, shocking her more than it should have. She swallowed hard, her heart skipping a beat. You don't even know me, she murmured. I know enough, he said simply. For the first time in years, Aaliyah felt speechless. Men flirted with her, sure. Men stared, complimented, tried their luck. But this was different. This man didn't ask. He didn't chase. He claimed, and the strangest part was that instead of running, part of her wanted to stay. Pulling her coat tighter, she broke the silence with forced nonchalance. Well, Mr. Protector, thank you for your concern. But I can handle myself. Joan studied her, eyes narrowing slightly. She had fire in her confidence, resilience, a spirit most people lacked. He liked that. Too much, he stepped back, offering a rare concession. Then allow me at least this. He held out his umbrella. Aaliyah blinked. Of all the things she expected, a demand, a threat, maybe even silence, a simple umbrella wasn't one of them. She hesitated, then accepted it, her fingers brushing his. A spark raced through her at the contact, sharp and undeniable. She looked up, meeting his gaze again. Do you always make strange women nervous in the rain? His expression didn't change, but his words were soft. Only the unforgettable ones. Her heart flipped, but she hid it with a smirk. Smooth talker. He inclined his head slightly, as though conceding the point. Good night, Aaliyah. Her breath caught. How do you? But he was already walking away, his black coat blending into the shadows, leaving her under the awning with an umbrella in hand and her pulse racing. She whispered to herself, what just happened? Back inside the Mercedes, Leon glanced at Joan. You gave her your umbrella. That's not like you. Joan's gaze remained fixed on the rain-slicked streets ahead. She doesn't know it yet, he said quietly, but she belongs to me. Leon exhaled slowly, worry creasing his features. He knew the danger of such words. He knew what happened when the boss claimed something or someone as his, and yet, watching the rare softness in Joan's eyes, he also knew there was no turning back, for the untouchable boss had finally found his obsession. The following week moved like a dream Aaliyah couldn't quite wake from. She tried to bury herself in work teaching English to her students, correcting essays, and preparing lesson plans. The school was comfortable, the pay decent, the staff kind. Yet, no matter how hard she tried, her thoughts drifted back to the stranger, Joan. He hadn't given her his name. He hadn't needed to. That face, those eyes, that presence impossible to forget. Every time she walked home at night, she half expected to find him leaning in the shadows again, waiting. Every time she entered the cafe, she scanned the room, anticipating his silhouette, but he didn't appear, not once. Instead, the roses began. The first bouquet arrived on a Tuesday. A dozen long-stemmed crimson roses, wrapped in black velvet paper, were delivered to her apartment door. No card. The second came Thursday. This time, 24 roses, deeper red, with a note tucked inside, for the woman who laughs in storms. By Saturday, the third bouquet didn't change, but his words were soft. Only the unforgettable ones. Her heart flipped, but she hid it with a smirk. Smooth talker. He inclined his head slightly, as though conceding the point. Good night, Aaliyah. Her breath caught. How do you? But he was already walking away, his black coat blending into the shadows, leaving her under the awning with an umbrella in hand and her pulse racing. She whispered to herself, what just happened? Back inside the Mercedes, Leon glanced at Joan. You gave her your umbrella. That's not like you. Joan's gaze remained fixed on the rain-slicked streets ahead. She doesn't know it yet, he said quietly, but she belongs to me. Leon exhaled slowly, worry creasing his features. He knew the danger of such words. He knew what happened when the boss claimed something or someone as his, and yet, watching the rare softness in Joan's eyes, he also knew there was no turning back, for the untouchable boss had finally found his obsession. The following week moved like a dream Aaliyah couldn't quite wake from. She tried to bury herself in work teaching English to her students, correcting essays, and preparing lesson plans. The school was comfortable, the pay decent, the staff kind. Yet, no matter how hard she tried, her thoughts drifted back to the stranger, Joan. He hadn't given her his name. He hadn't needed to. That face, those eyes, that presence impossible to forget. Every time she walked home at night, she half expected to find him leaning in the shadows again, waiting. Every time she entered the cafe, she scanned the room, anticipating his silhouette, but he didn't appear, not once. Instead, the roses began. The first bouquet arrived on a Tuesday. A dozen long-stemmed crimson roses, wrapped in black velvet paper, were delivered to her apartment door. No card. The second came Thursday. This time, 24 roses, deeper red, with a note tucked inside, for the woman who laughs in storms. By Saturday, the third bouquet arrived. White roses this time, a contrast to the others, their petals pristine. The card bore only one word, unforgettable. Aaliyah stared at the flowers filling her small apartment, their fragrance thick in the air. Her heart hammered, confusion mixing with something else she didn't want to name. She wasn't naive, she knew who they came from, and when the knock echoed at her door that night, her breath caught. She hesitated before opening it. When she did, he was there. Joan stood in the hallway, dressed in black as always, his presence dominating the small space. The dim light above cast shadows across his sharp features, making him look even more untouchable. You, she breathed. More accusation than greeting. Me, he replied simply. His gaze drifted past her shoulder, landing on the roses lined along the wall. Satisfaction flickered in his eyes. You kept them. She stammered, then straightened, folding her arms. I didn't exactly have time to throw out 3 giant bouquets. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Excuses. You like them. Her cheeks warmed. That's not the point. You can't just send things to people like this. I can, he said calmly. And I did. His confidence made her bristle. Do you even hear yourself? You don't know me. You don't know what I like, what I don't. I know enough, Joan interrupted, stepping closer. His voice lowered. Intimate. You like the cafe, the music, the notebook you carry everywhere. You prefer chestnuts over sweet buns. You walk alone, but you don't like being followed. And you Don't scare easily. Aaliyah's breath caught. His words weren't guesses. They were facts. Observations. Proof that he had been watching her far more closely than she'd realized. Her pulse quickened. That's stalking. No. He shook his head, eyes locked on hers. That's protecting. There's a difference. She swallowed, heart racing. Protecting me from what? His jaw tightened, the steel in his voice returning. From men who don't understand the word mine. The word struck again, heavy and possessive. She hated the way it made her stomach twist, hated that some traitorous part of her didn't want to fight it. You can't just claim people like that, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Joan leaned closer, his presence overwhelming. I don't claim people. I claim you. The silence between them was thick, charged. Aaliyah's mind screamed at her to shut the door, to end this before it spiraled further. But her body betrayed her, rooted in place, breath shallow. Finally, she managed to whisper, "Why me?" For the first time, Joan faltered. His gaze softened, the intensity dimming to something almost vulnerable. His answer came low, raw, like a confession pulled from the depths of his chest, because when you laugh, the world doesn't feel so empty. Aaliyah's lips parted, her heart thudding painfully. She hadn't expected that. Not from him. Not from a man who looked like he had never spoken a soft word in his life. She should have told him to leave. She should have closed the door. Instead, she stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was small, modest warm light, second-hand furniture, books stacked along the shelves. Joan took it all in silently, his tall frame somehow filling the tiny living room. He moved with precision, removing his coat, setting it neatly on the armchair, as though even here he demanded order. Aaliyah crossed her arms, trying to reclaim some control. "So, what now? You invade my home the way you invade my nights." He met her challenge calmly. "No. I wanted to see you. That's all." The simplicity of the words unnerved her. No elaborate excuses, no lies. Just the truth. She shook her head, sitting on the couch with a sigh. "You're crazy, you know that." Joan sat across from her, leaning forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Perhaps. But you intrigue me, Aaliyah. And I don't let go of what intrigues me." Her name rolled off his tongue differently, softer, deeper. Hearing it from him felt like both a warning and a promise. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of rain against the windows. The tension stretched, sharp and unyielding, until finally Aaliyah exhaled, breaking it with a nervous laugh. "Your trouble," she said quietly, Joan's lips curved in the faintest smile. "And you're mine." Her heart skipped, traitorous and wild. And though she didn't say it aloud, deep inside she knew, her life was no longer hers alone. From that night forward, the untouchable boss would no longer be a stranger, he would be her secret, her danger, and her obsession. As much as she was. The storm rolled in without warning. By nightfall, Shanghai was swallowed in rain and thunder. Lightning split the sky in jagged streaks, and the streets emptied as people rushed for cover. The city, usually alive and unyielding, now lay under a heavy, restless silence. Aaliyah tugged her coat tighter as she left the cafe, umbrella straining against the wind. She had stayed late, grading essays and nursing a cup of tea, trying to ignore the thoughts that had haunted her all week. Thoughts of him, Joan. Ever since that night in her apartment, he had lingered at the edges of her life. She caught glimpses of him, sometimes his car idling across the street when she left work, his silhouette in the shadows near her building. He never approached, never spoke, but she knew he was there. Watching. Protecting. Claiming, and despite herself, she no longer felt fear, she felt safer. Shaking her head, she muttered, "Girl, you're losing it." But as she turned the corner into the quieter stretch of road that led to her apartment, the unease hit her. Two men stepped out from the alley. They weren't like the usual passers-by. Rough clothes. Hardened faces. Eyes that lingered too long. They blocked her path, their smiles sharp, predatory. "Well, what do we have here?" One drawled in Mandarin, though his accent was thick, not local. "Pretty F. Foreigner walking alone in the rain." Aaliyah's grip on her umbrella tightened. Her heart raced, but she lifted her chin, forcing calm. "Excuse me," she said firmly, trying to sidestep. The second man moved faster, blocking her again. His grin widened. "No need to rush. We just want to talk." Fear crept in now. The street was empty, the storm too loud for anyone to hear if she screamed. She took a step back, ready to bolt, and then the sound came, footsteps. Slow. Steady. Unhurried, the two men turned. Joan emerged from the shadows like a phantom. Black coat draped over broad shoulders, dark hair damp from the rain, his gaze sharp enough to slice through stone. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't even glance at the men at first. His eyes were on Aaliyah. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his tone low, almost gentle. She shook her head quickly, relief flooding her chest. "No, but," the first man scoffed, stepping forward. "Who the hell are you?" "This isn't your business," he never finished. Joan moved with lethal precision. In one swift motion, he caught the man by the collar, slamming him against the wall so hard the impact echoed down the street. The other lunged, but Joan's fist connected with his jaw before he could blink. He collapsed into the puddles, groaning. The first man gasped, clawing at Joan's grip. "Wait please," Joan's voice was ice. "If you ever come near her again, you won't walk away breathing." He released him with a shove. The man staggered, dragging his unconscious companion before both disappeared into the storm, limping and broken. Silence fell, broken only by the pounding rain. Aaliyah stood frozen, umbrella slipping from her grasp. She had known Joan was dangerous, felt it in his aura, heard it in his words. But seeing how easily he dismantled two grown men without hesitation, it terrified her, and yet, even more terrifying was the way her heart beat faster, not just from fear but from something deeper. Joan turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "You're shaking." She swallowed hard, wrapping her arms around herself. "I've never seen anything like that." He stepped closer, slow enough to give her space to retreat if she wished. She didn't move. "You don't need to see it again," he said softly. "That's why I'm here." Her breath caught. "You were following me." "Protecting you," he corrected. His gaze bore into hers, steady and unyielding. "I told you. No one touches you. You're mine." The words, spoken so firmly, should have infuriated her. Should have made her slam the door on him, reject him, walk away. But instead, in the middle of the storm, Aaliyah felt the walls she had built start to crack. Because for the first time since arriving in Shanghai, she didn't feel alone, she felt wanted. She whispered, almost against her will, "You're trouble." Joan's lips curved in the faintest, dangerous smile. "For everyone else, yes. For you I'm salvation." The rain beat harder, thunder rumbling above, but neither of them moved. The world blurred around them, leaving only two figures standing in the storm, one untouchable, one unforgettable, both bound by something they didn't yet understand. And as Joan lifted her fallen umbrella and placed it gently back into her hands, Aaliyah knew one truth with terrifying certainty: this was no longer a curiosity, no longer a coincidence. This was the beginning of something she might never escape. The storm had passed by morning. Shanghai glittered under a washed sky, its glass towers gleaming, its streets freshly polished by rain. Life moved on as if the night's chaos had never happened. But for Aaliyah, nothing felt the same. She couldn't stop replaying it. The way Joan had appeared out of nowhere. The speed and precision with which he handled those men. The cold fire in his eyes when he threatened them, and then, the way his gaze softened, just for her. "No one touches you. You're mine." The words echoed in her chest, both terrifying and intoxicating. By the time she sat at her desk at school, red pen in hand, she had graded 3 essays without actually reading them. She sighed, rubbing her temples. you've been distracted all day, her colleague May observed, leaning against the desk with a knowing smile. Just tired, Aaliyah replied quickly, forcing a laugh. May narrowed her eyes playfully. Or maybe you met someone. Heat rose in Aaliyah's cheeks. What? No. But her denial only made May grin wider. You blush too easily, Aaliyah. Whoever he is, be careful. Shanghai men can be complicated. You have no idea, Aaliyah thought, biting back a nervous laugh. That evening, as she left the school, she wasn't surprised to find the black car parked across the street. Joan was leaning against it, dressed in another perfectly tailored black suit. His presence, as always, commanded the space around him, drawing curious glances from passers-by who quickly looked away. You, Aaliyah muttered, approaching him with folded arms. You can't just appear everywhere I go. He opened the car door, motioning toward it. Dinner. She blinked. Excuse me. Dinner, he repeated calmly. With me. Her brows shot up. That's not how you ask someone out. I don't ask, he said simply. I state. Aaliyah scoffed, though her heart betrayed her with a skip. And what if I say no? For the first time, his lips curved in something close to amusement. You won't. Against her better judgment, against every alarm bell ringing in her head, she got into the car. The restaurant wasn't one she had ever noticed before. Tucked away in a quiet alley, it didn't advertise itself, had no neon sign, no crowd outside. But inside, it was breathtaking, warm golden light, lanterns swaying above polished wood, tables set with delicate porcelain. The hostess bowed deeply when Joan entered, addressing him in hushed Mandarin, her tone respectful. They were led to a private booth at the back, away from the other diners. Aaliyah glanced around, uneasy. This place feels expensive. It is, Joan replied casually, taking his seat across from her. But you're worth it. Her cheeks warmed despite herself. You don't even know me well enough to say that. His dark gaze held hers steadily. I know enough. There it was again, that simple, unshakable certainty. They ordered. Joan chose dishes she hadn't even heard of, explaining briefly when she asked. He moved with quiet authority, every gesture precise. And yet, as the food arrived, Aaliyah noticed something surprising. He didn't dominate the conversation. He listened. He asked her about teaching, about her students, about why she came to Shanghai. He wasn't just polite, he seemed genuinely interested. So, she said between bites of dumplings, you know all these things about me, but I still don't even know your name. Joan leaned back slightly, regarding her in silence for a moment, as if deciding whether to share something rare. Then he said, Joan Chen. Joan, she repeated softly. Finally. Took you long enough. He inclined his head. Names have power. I don't give mine lightly. Aaliyah arched her brow. And yet you gave it to me. Yes. His voice was low, deliberate. Because you are mine. Her fork paused. You keep saying that. Like. Claiming me. Why? Joan didn't hesitate. Because it's true. You walked into my world, and now you cannot walk out. Not without me. The words should have frightened her. And maybe they did. But what unsettled her more was the spark of warmth in her chest. She forced a teasing smile. Sounds like an obsession. His gaze deepened, dark and unreadable. It is. The honesty in his voice stole her breath. After dinner, he drove her home. They stood outside her apartment building, the city buzzing softly around them. Thank you, she said awkwardly, clutching her bag. Joan's eyes lingered on her face, then on the curls damp from the evening air. He lifted a hand, almost hesitant, brushing one curl from her cheek. Aaliyah's breath. This place feels expensive. It is, Joan replied casually, taking his seat across from her. But you're worth it. Her cheeks warmed despite herself. You don't even know me well enough to say that. His dark gaze held hers steadily. I know enough. There it was again, that simple, unshakable certainty. They ordered. Joan chose dishes she hadn't even heard of, explaining briefly when she asked. He moved with quiet authority, every gesture precise. And yet, as the food arrived, Aaliyah noticed something surprising. He didn't dominate the conversation. He listened. He asked her about teaching, about her students, about why she came to Shanghai. He wasn't just polite, he seemed genuinely interested. So, she said between bites of dumplings, you know all these things about me, but I still don't even know your name. Joan leaned back slightly, regarding her in silence for a moment, as if deciding whether to share something rare. Then he said, Joan Chen. Joan, she repeated softly. Finally. Took you long enough. He inclined his head. Names have power. I don't give mine lightly. Aaliyah arched her brow. And yet you gave it to me. Yes. His voice was low, deliberate. Because you are mine. Her fork paused. You keep saying that. Like. Claiming me. Why? Joan didn't hesitate. Because it's true. You walked into my world, and now you cannot walk out. Not without me. The words should have frightened her. And maybe they did. But what unsettled her more was the spark of warmth in her chest. She forced a teasing smile. Sounds like an obsession. His gaze deepened, dark and unreadable. It is. The honesty in his voice stole her breath. After dinner, he drove her home. They stood outside her apartment building, the city buzzing softly around them. Thank you, she said awkwardly, clutching her bag. Joan's eyes lingered on her face, then on the curls damp from the evening air. He lifted a hand, almost hesitant, brushing one curl from her cheek. Aaliyah's breath. Caught, I told you, he murmured, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Unforgettable. And then he was gone, slipping back into the night with the same quiet dominance that had first drawn her in. Aaliyah leaned against her door once inside, heart racing. She should have been terrified. She should have told herself to stop, to run, to block him out, but instead, she whispered into the empty apartment, Joan Chen, what are you doing to me? And she knew the truth she didn't want to admit. She was falling, not just into curiosity, but into the danger of loving him. Episode 1 end here. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share and subscribe to my channel. Also click on the notification bell, so that you will get notified whenever a new story comes up. You can also go ahead to tell me the country you are watching from, so that I can make a story for you.